Zach, it is so good to see you. This video is by popular demand. People want to know if they should include Bitcoin in their portfolio, specifically retirees. And the reason that we're asking is because Fidelity recently published this white paper titled The Case for Bitcoin. And I, of course, want to talk to the specifics as we take a look at the price of Bitcoin right now, around 111,000. So let's get into the details first. And I want to dive into this first exhibit here. A 2% allocation, according to Fidelity, of Bitcoin could allow for an increase in annual spending ranging from 1 to 4% and potential losses of up to negative 1% in a worst case scenario. And a 5% Bitcoin allocation, let me scroll down to that one, could allow for an increase in annual spending by as much as 9.5% for older investors, but with much steeper potential losses of up to 3% in a worst case scenario. So, Zach, the reason you and I are chatting today, should retirees or pre-retirees consider putting Bitcoin in their portfolio?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on a few factors, and broadly speaking, because everybody's situation is going to be different. So
Right.
we'll just look at it from Fidelity recommending a 1 to 5% allocation. For a retiree not having to rely on their retirement accounts for a lot of income, a small allocation of that 1 to 5% would make sense of what Fidelity is stating there.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, we're looking at, okay, we don't need income. We're looking at alternative ways to get a little bit of growth from an asset class that is not correlated to the traditional markets. So this would be a satellite position, not a core holding inside of a portfolio. Now, for those pre-retirees who have about 10 years or more until they hit that magical retirement date that they have set, we would think that it would make sense for a long-term standpoint of having that 1 to 5% allocation. Now, there will
Mm-hmm.
be volatility along the way, but from what we've seen over the long term, Bitcoin has appreciated.
Certainly has. And more recently, since the election of President Trump, of course, the price of Bitcoin has been on the rise. So, why do you think that is? And do you think it should influence whether we invest in Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this administration has been really pro crypto, which has been
Yeah.
awesome to see. The first administration to really get their hands into the crypto scene and provide clear crypto legislation around the basic architecture of it, giving specific rules to these large institutions on how they can operate in this industry. Now, looking at the historicals of Bitcoin, the reason why the price has appreciated has been through about three different avenues, I would say: global policy instability, inflationary pressure, and
Yeah.
looser regulation.
Hmm.
This administration has provided already that loose regulation, and they're looking to weaken the dollar, which has both been tailwinds for Bitcoin, looking at it
Hmm.
historically. I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that the price movement that we've seen should be tied to politics. I think the politics have presented some short term narratives that can lead to a little bit of short term appreciation. However, if Bitcoin's value proposition depends on who occupies the White House, then we're talking about, okay, this is more of a speculation asset and not
Right.
diversification. The
Right.
case for owning it must rest on that long term conviction of its scarcity, global adoption, and the independence from centralized control.
Interesting. All right. So then, brass tacks, Zach, how should investors evaluate the role of Bitcoin in terms of diversification, risk management, and alignment with their long term financial goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bitcoin's correlation, as I briefly mentioned, looking at it from a diversification standpoint, we're really not looking at it as correlation to equities or bonds. This would be an alternative asset class that is offering us higher potential growth over the long term.
Hmm.
It's not really uncorrelated growth or a hedge when we're looking at these things. Looking at it from a risk management standpoint, there's a few different risks here. The main one being volatility. We've seen over since Bitcoin's inception of 2009, drastic price swings from the downside to the upside.
Right.
But as we're looking at this asset class starting to mature, we should start to see that risk narrow a little bit and become less volatile. The other risk I would say, of course, would be regulation uncertainty. Even
Right.
though this administration is trying to provide clarity around this, there still is that uncertainty as these bills are not into law yet. And then the last thing I would say is rebalancing risk. When Bitcoin appreciates a lot to the upside, that could cause our portfolio to be out of whack a little bit. So we have to figure out how are we rebalancing appropriately, and especially taking into consideration taxes. Thing would be the long-term goal. If your long-term goal is to get as much growth as you want out of your portfolio, Bitcoin, looking at the historicals, can potentially offer that. Looking back at that Fidelity article, offering about an additional 9% on portfolio.
And then for everybody watching, we will, of course, link to that white paper so that you can digest it on your own time. But Zach, this was incredibly helpful. I've had this conversation with a lot of people. This really brought it into perspective, and I understand it better now, even though I feel like Bitcoin, you're always learning something new. If
Yes.
somebody, though, Zach, would like to sit down and chat with you to talk through whether an allocation to Bitcoin makes sense for them, because everybody's going to be different, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, you can visit our website, youngwealthmanagement.com, or you could call us at 614-430-8383. And as I said in the beginning, Bitcoin might not be for everybody. What we try to do at Young Wealth Management is evaluate your situation first, then go from there to see if adding Bitcoin to the portfolio, if it makes sense for your long-term goals and objectives. And of course, it comes to you, the investor, being comfortable with handling the risk that comes along with Bitcoin as well with the volatility.
Absolutely. Right. All right, Zach, thank you so much.
Thanks. This was awesome.